Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Chris Harper, welcome to the conversation today.
Thanks for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
It is a real pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Toronto. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about transparent and ethical background checks, really centered around your business ZippedScript, and kind of the whole deal, the whole process around data privacy and background checks and what that looks like within organizations. It's a really interesting kind of sub piece of some of the things we often talk about on this podcast, but we're zooming in and exploring something a little bit different than we typically focus on. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. As we get started, I wanted to share Chris's bio with everybody. Chris Harper is CEO and co-founder of ZippedScript, a visionary entrepreneur with over a decade of leadership experience. Chris's entrepreneurial journey has been defined by innovation, ambition, and resilience, from launching his first business in his teens to leading ZippedScript's game-changing education verification platform. He has consistently turned bold ideas into thriving ventures. And I could share a whole lot more about Chris, but I'm going to pause there. Anything, Chris, you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
I think you nailed it, John. I think that was a lovely bio. So I think we're good to go.
Very good. All right. Well, as we get launched here, why don't you start by just sharing a little bit more about ZippedScript, your co-founder and CEO. Tell us a little bit about the founding, the startup of this, and then we can dig into really what you do in this whole background check piece.
Got it. Yeah. So high level, ZippedScript was started 3 years ago now, John. And I was actually helping, well, maybe I'll take it back a little further than that. I was running a cocktail mixer business, a guilt-free cocktail. It was a replacement for pop and juice as a mix for any hard liquor, no artificial flavors, colors, or sweeteners. And that was sold across the country in Canada. And it was sold in e-commerce on the internet to people in the United States and all over the world. And it was a great business. But it was very difficult for me to promote, drinking alcohol healthier, let's say, as I would go to bed and look up at the ceiling at night. I felt some type of internal conflict with promoting healthy drinking. I was the person where I could go out and have a couple drinks and then tomorrow I wouldn't. But, if I was promoting healthy drinking, you can see where that might end up. And it didn't feel like the correct path for me. So long story short, that was going well. And then during COVID, there was an older gentleman who was a friend of a friend, and we happened to be working in the same office, and he was looking for a new job. So I was helping him get set up with LinkedIn, which I found hilarious because he'd been in the corporate space for a long time, but he'd never really done LinkedIn because he had the same job forever. And in the process of setting up his LinkedIn profile, John, I realized that, you can just put whatever school you want. You can have a beautiful headshot. You can put whatever past job you want, right? You could have an undergrad from Harvard. You can make it up. You could have a master's from Johns Hopkins and then a PhD from Yale, right? And there's a lot of ways to make your profile look very legitimate without anybody questioning. So that's kind of where the idea spun out of. I thought there's got to be a way to verify this now because LinkedIn is such, it basically is the resume of today and the future. It's the digital resume. So I felt like, hey, if there's stuff on a profile, there should be a way to have it verified a lot quicker and a lot easier. And that's kind of what jumped us off, John, into the background check space, and specifically education verification and employment verification.
Well, yeah, that's very cool. I know that, companies all the time, like when someone's getting hired, they do a background check, right? I guess I've never really thought about just the random person jumping on LinkedIn, checking on somebody, maybe they made a connection at a trade show or, they just ran into someone and they exchanged, virtual cards or physical cards, and now they go look them up on LinkedIn or whatever to be able to like actually verify did this person do what they said they did. I never really considered that. So that's really cool to think that, yeah, like we can set that in place to have more confidence
Yeah.
in what people are
And
doing. It's helpful. It's helpful to everybody. It's helpful to me as I'm looking at other people's profiles, but it's also helpful to me in terms of like just I have more legitimacy to what I'm putting up
correct.
there, right?
Correct. And John, that's something I would like to add to that. It's like build trust from the outset, right? Like build it from the beginning, right? Don't
Mhm.
leave people wondering, is what I'm doing or what I did factual or not factual, right? I'd rather have a conversation start from like a foundation of trust than a foundation of question.
Well, very, very cool. All right.
Yeah.
So, with that as a foundation, then let's dive on in and talk about some common misconceptions with background checks. Um, like I just mentioned, one of the most common ways is you apply for a job, you go through the interview process, now you're getting an offer, but companies want to verify. They want to make sure that you didn't just lie up the wazoo on your resume, that like you actually did what you said you've done, that
Mhm.
you have the experiences that you say you have. So they're going to run a background check. They're going to, look at criminal record. They're going to look at, where you've lived, those sorts of things. They want to see that you've worked where you said you worked and that you have the education that you say you have. Um, so, what are some of those common misconceptions that employees might have around background checks and how their data is often used in that process?
Yeah, I would say one of the common misconceptions, and maybe this isn't answering your question directly, but if let's say you're a candidate applying for a job, typically those jobs are going to be competitive, right, John? Like,
Hmm.
and background checks are more frequently done in certain industries, so healthcare, finance, right? Any kind of white collar industry, they're going to be running a background check. Then anything associated with healthcare will also run a background check. And as everyone knows, the best jobs in the world, which those would be considered some of the greatest jobs in the world, the legal profession and everything, they're very competitive, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that people may not understand when they're a candidate in this process is the time it takes the employer to do the background check can be the difference between them not getting a second, third, fourth interview or even getting the job
Hmm.
compared to the other candidate. So if the other candidate already has certain background check things ready to go, or they've done the background check process more rapidly, they're going to be put up higher on the list of possible candidates or even beat that person for a job. And we see that all the time. And this can be something as not just in the job space, this can be continuing education as well. So if you're looking to, go from a bachelor's to a master's and you want to do it overseas or you want to do it abroad, there's going to be an education verification. There's going to be a criminal record. So the faster, people listening, if you're applying for jobs or you want to do continuing education anywhere, the faster you can go through the process and input your own data, the higher likelihood it is that you're going to be considered for that position or that possibility to continue education abroad. So the speed at which the end user can actually offer up certain data points is important. But kind of the issue right now, John, too, is even when the candidate inputs data, if they're not using ZippedScript, it could take forever because a lot of this is still a manual process.
Hmm.
But I would say maybe to add one of the misconceptions is, this is not very invasive from a privacy standpoint, and it's candidate permission. So the user or the candidate will agree to offering up such information, but it's far less invasive than allowing cookies or having a Facebook profile or an Instagram profile. Let's say.
Okay. Can you walk us through then what it kind of looks like on your end? Um, so I want to use this product, to be able to set myself up for success, to be, like you said, rapid verification. So I'm
Mhm.
not setting myself behind the eight ball, but in front.
Yeah. So if you're like a candidate applying for a job, if this is the kind of analogy we're talking about here, because this is most common when it comes to
Hmm.
background checks or even immigration too, John, right? Like we work
Mm.
with countries in the Middle East for immigration things, and it's for educated immigrants to come into the country. It's when you get a request to do a background check, I would say to people, execute on that request as quickly as humanly possible to give
Mhm.
yourself the highest likelihood of getting whatever end state it is that you want to achieve by completing the background check. Because a lot of the time, like I said, people will delay, they won't see it or something like that. And then, you know what? They lose out on the job position, they lose out on, the immigration status, or they lose out on the continuing education.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Okay,
Yeah.
so we acknowledge it's super important that we prioritize the process of getting background checks, the verification piece, make it as quick as possible.
Mhm.
That the data privacy issue shouldn't be like terribly concerning or complicated. Like it really is, not as invasive as what most of us
Your
voluntarily
search
do.
history. Yeah, exactly. That's what I often tell people is like you may feel like it's more invasive, but it's not. We're just checking whether or not do you have this degree, do you have this job, are you who you say you are, the ID verification, etc. And it doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah, yeah. So, what would you say in an ideal scenario? Like, what would that truly transparent and ethical background check process look like from the employer side?
I think honestly, right now, I think a lot of it in the industry, they do a good job at being transparent about what's going on during the background check process. There is new stuff in the industry, Jonathan. There is social media checks, which we don't participate in. Those
Yeah.
ones that's a different category. I don't know if we want to go into it, but it's very interesting. And maybe it's something good for your listeners to be cognizant of and aware of is that's happening a lot more now from an employer standpoint, where companies are checking your social media accounts and then creating a score based off of your accounts and your history on those accounts in terms of what you're participating in online.
Ooh, tell me more about. I know that companies check those accounts, but tell me more about the score. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so
What kind of goes into those sometimes?
Yeah, so I'll reiterate here, Jonathan. We don't do that.
Yeah.
ZippedScript, my company, we do not participate in that. We participate in employment and education verification. We feel far more critical data points when it comes to a background check.
Right.
Regardless of that, there are companies doing this. The score is going to take into account many different things. You can basically consider it a scraping bot or an algorithm that goes out, looks for your name, looks for all the accounts associated with your name. And now they're doing things to go as far as, Jonathan, where let's say you have a private account. Many people think this private account will keep them safe from a social media background check. It's not
Yeah.
the case. If you want to be unknown in the social media space, I would say, don't use your name, don't use whatever. Just at least be aware of what you're participating in, because they can find that username and associate that username with comments, likes, etc. And they're basically going to score it on like, are you negative? Are you you can think of the many different possibilities here and how scores can be created. But comments, because I'm closey with people in the industry, comments are typically one of the worst things that are being seen right now when social media checks are being done, how human beings comment on other posts on the internet.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and it makes sense.
it
Anything on
does.
the internet lives on, right? And we always see the
Yes.
big news stories of the celebrities or the politicians, or those are the ones that get highlighted. But
Yeah.
just like those can get highlighted in the news for high profile people, it can happen for any of us when we're going up for a big job and they're running a
Yep.
background check. It may not make the news, but they're going to find out about it
Key
because
point, Jonathan.
they want to make sure that
Yeah.
we're not going to embarrass them, that we're not going to do something right that's going to hurt their reputation or whatever.
Correct, and it's a very big point there. Like you're not going to hear about it in the media if somebody's hiring for like a junior intermediate position, but it's happening that people aren't getting jobs because of their social media presence. So let's be cognizant of it because now it's just part of our world. And I think a lot of people may have not accepted that yet, especially when it comes to being employed.
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so coming back to the ethical kind of process of what this should look like. You were talking
Mhm.
about that, and we derailed and kind of went off on a tangent.
We did.
But yeah, what do you think a truly transparent and ethical background check process should look like?
I think it starts with the end user. And Jonathan, our company and my company, ZippedScript, we innovated in this way. And I'm going to talk about it for a second. The industry before us for decades was only ever concerned about the employers or the governments that were doing the background check, not actually the end user or the human being that we were collecting the data on. So we kind of we approached the industry with a different business model strategy. We went and said, hey, all these people that have degrees and all these companies and governments that want to verify these degrees, that's amazing. But what if we went directly to the graduates and said, hey, why don't you verify your degree for free? Put it on our platform. So then when you go to get a background check, when you go to immigrate, it's already available, right? The employer, the government can just immediately unlock it. So we're reducing the time to hire for employers, which will result in a macro global thing where you have more efficient companies, because as you scale, one of the biggest issues in scaling, especially with the world we live in today, Jonathan, with tech companies that are, if you're moving really fast, you need more people. To get more people, you got to run more background checks. So we reduce that time to hire globally because the candidate already has their degree verification, their employment verification completed. You can just unlock it. And eventually you can see where this is going to go, Jonathan. We're going to be adding, ID verification as well, so that the individuals can come to the job interview already trusted. Here's all my stuff right now. We don't have to do it later. And on the government side, it's the same thing. If you want to immigrate to a country where you feel you have more opportunities, if you can have your degree and your past employment already verified with ZippedScript, then man, your likelihood of going through the process and increasing the chances that that does happen is going to increase. And I think when it comes to transparent and ethical background checks, to kind of answer your question more directly, I think, not to toot our own horn here, but I am. By going directly to end users, communicating with them, having a UI UX that's friendly with them and showing that they matter, and we're going to them, not just the employer or the government. We start with them because it starts with their data anyways. I think that's going to be the future of the industry. Companies like mine and others in the space, I think, are catching on, where you got to talk to the end users. You got to talk to the human beings. It's their data. Let's make sure they're happy with it. They know what's going on, and let's give them the best chance to use their data correctly.
Yeah, interesting.
I have a more controversial viewpoint too, if you want to hear it.
Yeah,
in the industry. It's an industry specific thing, but I see a future in which the end user verifies their degree on our platform, their employment, their ID, their criminal record, whatever it may be, right? And then we have a customer that wants to unlock it. I see a future in which there can be a shared, mutually beneficial, let's call it maybe even a revenue share or profit sharing with the actual users that have the data. And that seems to be controversial in the industry for legacy providers, Jonathan, when I speak about it. But I don't think it's that controversial, because I think it's your data, and I think there's a way that people can be compensated for it in the future. So we're working on that actively, and we'll see where that goes in the next year or two.
Interesting. And is this like leveraging blockchain, or like how is this used? I mean, I can't claim to like fully understand blockchain. I just know that it seems like it's often talked about in terms of these types of issues, these types of applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely something we've considered doing, is building on chain, as they would say. Right now, we don't do that. But when we look at payments in the future and how we could compensate end users for their data being used and unlocked, it's definitely something we're open to and we're thinking of. The reason we're not on chain right now, Jonathan, is no matter how many people think, cryptocurrencies and blockchain is very prevalent in day-to-day life, not everybody knows how to use a wallet. Not everybody knows, the codes and everything. It's still a little scary for a lot of people. So we're just built out on a more, it's not traditional, but a more traditional tech stack of a database that we share access to via APIs and get unlocks. But there is a future where I think blockchain has a place here, because especially in terms of making payments to end users, if that's going to be the route we do go down.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we've talked a lot about hiring. You've talked about even like immigration, various use cases where this could be super helpful. In terms of like student data, even you're applying to grad school, you're utilizing student data in various ways. One thing we haven't really talked about yet is like student lending. Maybe let's touch on that a little bit as we start to wrap up. What's the connection there, and why might that be part of what we consider as we're thinking about these background checks and verification?
It's a great question. There's a legacy provider in this space, and I know you touched on it a little bit there previously in terms of what do ethical background checks look like, and I think this is a good time for me to maybe call this back, John. Which is, for your listeners, you're in Salt Lake City, Utah, right? You mentioned or just south of there. So for anyone in the United States, there's a legacy provider that we know well, and we think they were awesome, and we still think they're awesome, called the National Student Clearinghouse. And They do most of the education verifications. We'd be considered a competitor, although we believe in co-opetition, Jonathan. We're not much of an adversarial kind of company. We like to work with people when possible and whenever we can. But they were originally started with the banks and the government to tie in directly to universities and colleges all over the United States and let the banks know and let the government know as soon as John Westover graduated, and if he had student loans, it's time to send him a letter and let him know it's time to start paying those loans back. And that transitioned from sending letters to sending emails. And they used to be a semi-private / publicly funded company. And that's how they got started. And they still do that to this day. And they just so happen to, because they have all those API connections into all those institutions, to let the banks know when to start calling those loans back. They also do education verification. Do I think that's ethical? I don't think that's ethical, especially when it comes to lending. They're making a lot of profit off of education verification. There's a way in which, Jonathan, maybe instead of just making pure profit and paying your executives $500,000 a year to call back loans, maybe you could have some type of program that helps, put a small dent in that student debt that you guys are helping banks and government call back. I do think if you get a loan, maybe you should have to pay it back on some level. I don't disagree with that, but I think they should definitely be more transparent about where that business model is and what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I tend to agree. I think.
And it's not out there. Oh,
yeah. Interesting.
I think there's a positive way for them to spin it, Jonathan. No, I think they could do some right with some of that revenue they're bringing in. I think they could assist with some student loan programs or anything like that.
Well, yeah, and here in the U.S., it's a really interesting debate around student loans, around how the cost of higher ed and the amount of student debt and all of that, and student loan forgiveness. Like this is a big topic, a big can of worms to open, but I like how this ties into identity verification and some of these pieces that we've been talking about. Well, Chris, This has just been a really great conversation. I note the time. I'm going to have to let you go here in a few minutes. Before we wrap things up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word for today.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It's been amazing. Good chat. If anyone wants to connect with me, you can hit me on LinkedIn. It's the easiest place to find me. You can just search Chris Harper, throw ZippedScript in there if I don't come up. Other than that, you can check us out at zippedScript.com. LinkedIn is the best way to reach out. And other than that, for all the lovely people listening, let's make the world a more efficient and happy place to be. One great idea at a time, one execution away from changing the whole world. So it's been a pleasure, John. I really appreciate you having me. And it was great to speak.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
John.
John.
Audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Chris can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.